Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today, we're going to keep on chugging along. We're almost at the end. Today, we're going to be talking about chapter 28 in your textbook. So let's not waste time and let's get into it. Share my screen. Okay, chapter 28, the Affluent Society. I was going to say Society. The Affluent Society. So we're talking post-World War II America, 1940s and 50s, and a little bit of the 60s. So, yeah. We're going to be talking about the Cold War too, so that should be review for most of you. All right, so it's dubbed the economic miracle following World War II. Why was there so much economic success minus the inflation following the immediate years? Well, three reasons. Government spending, which will lead to the formation of the interstate highway system, but more on that later. You have the baby boomer generation. And it's roughly about the time after World War II to about 1964 when the first birth control pill was invented. So that's why it stops at 1964. So baby boomers are this generation. Both my parents were born during this time period. So they're they're the boomers, as the kids say, right? But with all these kids, around 75 million children will be born during this time period. So our population will grow, creating more and more consumer demand because that's what we are as a country. And all these families growing is going to lead to a growth of in the suburbs, suburbanization, the outskirts of towns and city limits, which will increase the home and automobile purchases. And industries affected by the automobile are going to be obviously the housing industry and, of course, the oil industry and, the things that make tires, right? Rubber. And this is especially true in Texas because they have their own oil reserves out there. If you've ever heard of this football team, the Houston Oilers, there you go. So you have the growth of the Sun Belt region. It's this 15-state area from South Carolina through Florida all the way to California. And it grew at a rate twice as fast as the Northeast. The Northeast area is called the Frost Belt or the Rust Belt. So this area is called the Sun Belt because, the southern United States sees a lot of sun. And it's fairly hospitable weather. And yeah. Unions during this time, so they have escalator clauses, which are automatic pay increases in line with the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which determines inflation. So that's good. Strikes were becoming less frequent during this time. The AFL and CIO, the two biggest unions, merged into one large union, and talked about this act last chapter, the Taft-Hartley Act, which hurt unions, and they outlawed closed shop practices, only hiring union workers. So this is going to lead to a decrease in union membership. So this is the area known as the Sun Belt. So a lot of old people will be moving down here because, when they get to that retirement age, they want to live in sunny areas. So, yeah. Don't want to live in the cold? No. So there's an explosion in science and technology. New medical advancements, many happened before the 1950s, including the discovery of antiseptic solutions, penicillin. In 1954, the polio vaccine was created, developed by Jonas Salk. He will provide free vaccines for the entire country. Sound familiar? You have the DDT pesticide, which was used during World War II, and it wasn't deemed that harmful. It was harmful for insects. It was used to spray on crops to get rid of the bugs eating the corn, the wheat, vegetables, fruits, and you have Rachel Carson. She will write a novel, Silent Spring. This is going to come up during the if you want to call it an environmental revolution of the 70s. Her book is going to be a leading influence on that time period of environmentalism, because there are harmful effects that came from using DDT, spraying it on crops, and then having the people eat those crops and suffer the side effects. So it's going to lead to an eye-opening experience. Okay, DDT pesticides. We'll talk about that a little bit later. 1952, the U.S. tested their first hydrogen bomb. It was like, I think it was 50 times more powerful, destructive than the original atom bombs used in 1945. So very, very publicized event. And less than a year later, or the next year later, the Soviet Union tested their own hydrogen bomb. And this is where that, the espionage and the Rosenberg's like, how can they develop something that we just tested and it took us, so many years, but they can do it in less than a year or a year later, so that's where this, like, having spies, taking these loyalty oaths come into effect. Okay. Space program is definitely going to explode over this time, because in 1957, the Soviet Union launched the artificial satellite Sputnik into the atmosphere, into space. And when they saw this, the American government had their ego knocked a bit, because they're like, the Soviet Union can't beat us, man. No way. So the U.S. responds by increasing spending on science and education. In 1958, NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Association, I'm guessing, I'm pulling at straws. That's what NASA stands for. National Association of Space Aeronautics. I don't know. Something, I know the word aeronautics is in there. Anyways, Yuri Gagarin, whichever way you want to say it, became the first person to fly in outer space. He's a Soviet, April 12th, 1961. So 4 years later, they were able to send a man into space. And at this time, the Soviet Union is well ahead of the United States in this, quote, space race, 2-0. Here's Rachel Carson. Here's Sputnik. And here's Yuri. All right, people of plenty. So like we talked about at the beginning, the rise in consumerism. Consumer credit increased drastically during the 1950s. You have credit cards, store cards, Sears cards, Montgomery Ward, all those. You have car manufacturers will produce newer, more stylish cars. New appliances invented during this time, dishwashers, garbage disposals, and of course, the television. It was only black and white at this time, but it was still created. And Disneyland will become very popular. So also at the beginning, we mentioned the interstate highway system. So the Federal Highway Act of 1956 was created, creating more than 40,000 miles of highways across America. It's the largest government works project. And as I said last year, for those who had me in world history, Highways were created to, in case of for a nuclear evacuation. And I gave this example, it's very grim, but if anyone wanted to attack the United States, all they would have to do is locate the Bay Area around 2 to 3 p.m. because there's traffic all over the place, right? Am I right? So that's where highways, wouldn't be fun. Wouldn't be fun. They're still not fun. I know there's some people who get nervous driving on highways. So anyways, impacts of highways. Why am I talking about myself? You have the railroad industry was negatively affected because now people can just drive their cars, ship their stuff through trucks, and it's a lot less cheaper. The hotel and motel industry will drastically increase because these long drivers need somewhere to stay. And if you have these motels and hotels, they can drive, travel the country, sleep in a motel. You also have the growth of fast food industries like McDonald's, In-N-Out. We all love In-N-Out. The growth and it's also going to lead to a growth of the suburbs. So now you can work in the city, but live much further away from the city and drive 20, 30 miles. I don't know. That's very far. It's very far. But you know what I'm saying, like. Just like Fremont's like a suburb of, if you want to say Fremont's a suburb of Oakland, of San Jose, you know what I'm saying? Like Sunnyvale's like a suburb of San Jose. I can't think of it anymore. I don't know why. I don't know why I said Hayward's like a suburb of Oakland. Okay, so you could work in Oakland but live in Hayward. You could travel farther distance. That's what I'm trying to say. So this is the Interstate Highway Act, and as you know, this is I-5. If you've ever heard that, Interstate 5 going all the way up, and then you have I-80, which is the transcontinental highway that connects New York. I don't know where it breaks off in here, but it connects New York to San Francisco. Highway 80, I-80. So suburbs, we talked about, you have Levittown, which is this suburb in Long Island where you have these cookie cutter houses. They're very similar, 2-3 bedroom houses. And this will be duplicated in many other cities across America. And these are called Levittowns. So know that term, Levittown. African Americans were forbidden from buying homes in Levittown. That's discriminatory. You have what's called white flight, which white people are moving to the suburbs from the cities. So now you have blacks, especially from the South, this is during this second Great Migration, are going to move into those cities for those more job opportunities and, being closer to work and all that in cities. Middle-class families are created. Many married women did not work, and they're seen in television shows like Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy, any show you can find during this time. They focus on the family, the wife, staying at home. You have Dr. Benjamin Spock, no relation to this Spock. He had a book, Baby and Childcare, about raising children should be child-centered. And then there's this cult of domesticity. We talked about this. It's like Republican motherhood during the 1840s. So women were expected to stay at home and raise a family, not really go out into the workforce and get a job. And television, as mentioned earlier, 40 million TVs were in America by 1957, more than refrigerators. That's a little... That's nice to know. You have advertising industry was increased during this time due to television, all these ads, commercials. And there's a quote from your book: TV was also contributing to the sense of alienation and powerlessness amongst groups excluded from the world of it portrayed. So, you know, everyone, 40 million TVs, those aren't just 40 million white people. Those are 40 million whites, Mexicans, blacks, Asians, all the lot. And what they're seeing on television are these white families. And that's going to change. But at the very beginning, they were white. So here's Leave It to Beaver. This is Beaver. If you've never seen this show, check it out. That's Wally. That's Mr. Beaver Cleaver. This is the Cleaver family. That's obviously the dad and mom. This is a Levittown. This is the suburbs. This is Fremont. Okay. I mean, this picture is not of Fremont, but you see all these neighborhoods, 1-2-story houses. Well, now they're 2-story houses too, but you know, all these 1-story houses across the street from Kennedy. Right there. Boom, suburbs. There you go. So white collar, office jobs, outnumbered blue collar, manufacturing in the 1950s. As talked about earlier, schools increased the focus on math and science thanks to Sputnik, because we needed more scientists than we had, and we needed to beat the Soviets. Mentioned a while ago, the Beat Generation. These are authors that criticize middle-class values and conformity in the 1950s. This is exemplified in Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And the Beat Generation is very similar to the Lost Generation of the 1920s, when they were talking about criticizing consumerism and conformity during the 1920s. The Beats, as we mentioned during the 1920 lecture, are very similar to the Lost Generation. And then you have the emergence of rock and roll, people. Rock and roll music makes its appearance during the 1950s. It was influenced by African-American music, and largely the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is going to be at the front of this rock and roll pandemonium. And he's going to also bring sexuality to the forefront of American society, where all his moves were very provocative. And so that's why you see all these young girls in his music videos, and all the documentaries about it are screaming out towards Elvis. And good looking guy making those moves in a society that wasn't yet ready for it. Let's just put it that way. Very conservative. That's Elvis Presley. Fun fact, because of his gyrating moves in his lower body, cameramen at these TV shows or concerts were told to record him from the waist up. So there's that for you. If you've ever seen, Forrest Gump, and they try and bring him in and have him make moves because Forrest's legs are in those braces. Yeah, I'm just making the connection. If you've ever seen Forrest Gump, which I'm sure you have. The Other America is a book written by Michael Harrington, and he brought this book brought attention to the poverty scene in America that wasn't largely discussed about. And this will influence Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society in the 60s. In it, he argued that 25% of the nation and 40% of African Americans lived in poverty, and Native Americans were among the poorest of the poor in America. Inner cities will have a decline due to the growth of the suburbs. Many cities became run down or ghetto. And, cities don't want to uplift, improve that area. And that's why they're called ghettos. You have this idea of urban renewal, which will come about in response to all these ghettos and cities like not having great areas to look at. And it was an effort to rebuild the poor areas, but again, at a slow pace. It wasn't their first priority. Am I right? Am I right? Oh, geez, Louise. All right, so rise of the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement there's a little bit beginnings in the 1940s, and obviously during the 50s and 60s, big. So some of the beginning events of the civil rights movement in 1948. Of course, we talked about this last time. Truman desegregated the military with Executive Order 9981. Also talked about in the last couple chapters the WWII campaign from World War II, victory over fascism abroad and communism, and victory over racism at home. That's why a lot of African Americans will join the war effort, not because they weren't supportive of it, but if I fight for my country will give me more rights when I come back home. And sadly, they did not. Very, very, very important Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education. And it ended the separate but equal clause established by Plessy versus Ferguson. So you need to know that officially eliminates the separate but equal clause, and now will address schools and school boards, school districts to be desegregated with all deliberate speed. But, there's going to be massive resistance. Many Southern schools would rather shut down rather than desegregate. If you've ever seen Remember the Titans, you saw that in the beginning of their school year there in Virginia. You have something created called the Southern Manifesto, and it was signed by over 90 members of Congress, saying that the Supreme Court overstepped its boundaries because nowhere in the Constitution is education even mentioned. It's not even mentioned in the 14th Amendment. So they felt like this was an extreme oversight by the Supreme Court. However, as we know, that is still bad. Come on now. And then you have this Little Rock 9, a high school in Arkansas, where this high school prevented 9 African Americans from going into the school, into the building. So President Eisenhower now, following Truman, President Eisenhower will send in the National Guard to escort the Little Rock 9 from class to class. So here you have that. And this is the WWII campaign. Okay, Montgomery bus boycott, December 1st. Was it 1955, 1954? One of those numbers. Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat because buses, whites sat in the front, blacks sat in the back. She didn't want to give up her seat. She was tired. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to come to the defense. Young Martin Luther King at this time. He's only 26 years old. And his ideas were drawn on from Jesus, Henry David Thoreau, and Gandhi. This idea of civil disobedience, nonviolent protest. 1 year after Rosa Parks was arrested, Montgomery buses were desegregated because a lot of African Americans in Montgomery use the bus system to go around town, and when they're not paying buses to go from their job places to places, the busing system will lose money, and it's going to happen for over a year. So they're like, all right, we got to desegregate it. So TV and the civil rights movement demonstrated how the whites live. However, that will inspire activism to achieve similar living conditions, because what they see on TV, they want in their own life. And this is especially true for minorities. So they want what the whites have. Why can't we have it, right? And the Cold War also helped contribute to the civil rights movement. And the thinking is the U.S. better than the Soviet Union if there's discrimination and racism in the country? Think about that stuff nowadays with all that's going on. Here's Rosa Parks, and in the background, a young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. All right, so now this is, these are world events you need to know. These next couple slides should be a review for you, especially those who had me last year. But Eisenhower and his ideas, his foreign policy, his events that happened while he was president. He has a Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and he will come up with this idea of we need massive retaliation in case the Soviets attack us. And it's this idea called brinkmanship, being pushed to the brink of war, living on the edge every day. You don't know who's going to attack, what's going on. There's a lot of espionage, a lot of drama. Everyone's on high alert. Dien Bien Phu falls in 1954. Shortly after World War II, France tried to reconquer Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And the French lose. The French are disgraced. They are forced to leave Vietnam. And there's a fear of Vietnam turning communist. So the U.S. will increase their presence and send military advisors during the 1950s. You have Eisenhower's doctrine, kind of stemming from Truman's doctrine, which stemmed from the Roosevelt Corler, which stemmed from the good neighbor policy by our boy FDR, who was influenced by his cousin Teddy, who was influenced by James Monroe and the Monroe Doctrine. Anyway, a lot of doctrines you'll hear: Reagan Doctrine, Bush Doctrine, so whatever. So this idea that communism could progress to the Middle East, especially those oil-rich nations in the Middle East where we were getting our oil from, and that's going to come up during the 70s and 80s. And in this doctrine, the president could authorize and provide military and economic aid to nations resisting communism. And there's that idea of the domino theory. As one domino falls, all the rest near it will fall to communism. So in Iran, you have Mohammad Mossadegh. I don't know. I'm sorry if I butchered it. He was elected and he was overthrown by the CIA, and the Shah of Iran, a dictator, was put back in charge. Not going to go over well. You also have the Suez Crisis, where the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, I think I said his name, nationalized the Suez Canal, meaning the country now owns the Suez Canal, not France or Britain. Remember, the British used that for trade to go through the Suez Canal. They're the ones who helped finance it. And the Egyptian government didn't benefit from it. And now, at this time, the Egyptian government says, no more. Well, France, Britain, and Israel will attack Egypt. And the U.S. did not support this attack, and they didn't want World War III popping off. So Eisenhower basically tells the rest of these countries to withdraw from Israel. Also at this time, Guatemalan President Jacobo Arbenz was overthrown by the CIA after he nationalized all the land owned by the United States Fruit Company. These are also called the Banana Wars. And yeah, not going to go over well. We don't have a good track record in Latin America, to say the least, at this time. That's John Foster Dulles on the left, and this is Shah Reza Pahlavi on the right with Ike. Last slide, Cuba. Can't talk about Cuba. Can't talk about the Cold War without Cuba. U.S. businesses owned a significant amount of land and resources, sugar. January 1st, 1959, Fidel Castro comes to power, overthrowing Fulgencio Batista. Castro and the USSR will grow close, and the U.S. cut ties formally with Cuba. You have the Hungarian Revolt, where Hungarian citizens sought democratic reforms in their communist country. Soviet Union, part of the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union will quickly crush this revolution, and the U.S. did not intervene. You also have some late drama before our boy JFK gets elected. This is one of the last Eisenhower events on the foreign sphere, where the U-2 spy plane was shot down May 1st, 1960. And over this time, the U.S. and Soviet Union planned a series of planned summits to, limit all the arms that are being built. And this spy plane of ours was shot over Soviet Union airspace. Francis Gary Powers is the pilot. He gets arrested. I think he's put in jail over there for like 5 years before he's returned. And Nikita Khrushchev, who's Soviet premier at this time, because Stalin dies in, I believe, 54 or 56. So he's in power during this time, and Nikita Khrushchev will cancel further summits, which we were kind of making progress, and then this event happened to kind of set us back a lot. And that will set the stage for what's to come in JFK's administration. That's U-2 spy plane, similar to that. So don't fly a spy plane over the airspace of a hostile enemy. Anywho, that concludes today's lecture. A little bit about America at home following World War II, and a little bit more on the civil rights movement, and a little review on the Cold War and Cold War events that the United States were in. So hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you smash that like button. And as always, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.